on the kickoff of the college football playoffs, Jay Paterno. Yes, Jay Paterno, the son of Joe Paterno, joins the One Leg Up Network. How are you, Jay?
Doing great. How about you?
When I saw this pitch, I immediately jumped because I had a very close family friend who went to Penn State, who was huge with Penn State. We actually went to a couple games together, and just an affinity for your dad. Just to be honest with you, I loved your dad and loved what he did with Penn State. So welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks.
I guess right off the bat, what would he think of a 12 and what do you think of a 12 team playoff? Is this wild or what?
It's probably a little too much. I mean, in terms of when you look at Penn State as the sixth seed, having lost the Big Ten championship game, they've got four more games to play if they win it all, just to play for the national championship and win it. That's 17 games. Probably too much, but I think there'll be adjustments to schedules and things like that. I think as we go, certainly the players are going to want to cut the playoff revenue, and they should. You're asking them to play 3 or 4 more games. They should get that. But it's obviously exciting because down the stretch, there are a lot more teams in the conversation, a lot more games that suddenly meant something to get in or get out. But I think it's good to have. You got home games at Notre Dame, you got home games at Penn State, home game at Ohio State, home game in Texas. And I think then, it'll sort itself out in terms of seeding and there are going to be some things people don't like, but, that's with anything you do the first time. I lost the audio on you.
You played and coached with your dad. Is that correct? You played and coached under him? What was that experience like as a player and as a coach?
Well, it was great sometimes. I think the thing that was really good was that we kept it very, very professional. When I walked, anytime it was related to work, I would refer to him as Coach or Joe. And then, if I was at the house, then it was Dad. And when I would do media interviews about him, I would reference him as Joe. Even if someone said, "Well, your dad," this, I'd say, and I would just answer with Joe or Coach, whatever. Just because I think it's important, and that goes for anybody that works with a father or a mom in a business, whatever. It was as much to keep it on a professional level setting for me, but also for coworkers. Because if you're sitting in a meeting and there's an argument between 2 or 3 and you're trying to pitch a game plan or whatever it may be, and you're saying, but Dad this and Dad that and Dad this, the guy that you're having a discussion with, the coworker is like, oh yeah, he's playing the dad, the son card. So it was as much to keep it on a professional level, not just for me, but the guys I coach, the guys I work with, the whole 9 yards.
That's a good compartmentalization, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
As a player, did you ever think that this kind of system would happen? Like, you're here 30 years ago, fighting the national title and whatnot. Did you ever think this would what it would come down to, a 12-team thing, or did that not even cross your mind back then?
Well, I think if you look at it crossed my mind because in 68, Penn State was 11-0, finished second. 69 finished 11-0 as second. 73 finished 12-0 as second. 94 finished 12-0 and would have killed Nebraska if they'd played them. That was the best offensive football team maybe in the history of college football when you look at the talent that was on there and how well they produced. So, I mean, certainly all along. I mean, I remember drawing up things like this in high school about, having 8 teams. How would you do that? When I was a kid, I would daydream about those things. So it doesn't surprise me. I'm surprised it took this long. But with the conference championship games, they kind of get in the way a little bit. Whereas in one, and I coached at James Madison University when they were still in 1AA. So I have experience with the 16-team playoff. And there's no conference championship games at that level. So you go right into the playoffs. And even they've gone to a 24, I think it's 24 team bracket now where there's, 8 teams get buys and 16 play to get into the round of 16. So, I thought it would happen. I just didn't think it would take this long.
Talking with Jay Paterno, and you've also written a book about your experiences. Tell us a bit about the book that just was released, I believe.
Yeah, the book's called Blitzed, and it's Blitzed, the all-out pressure of college football's new era. And really what it is I had written a book 4 years ago based on things that I had experienced in coaching at this level. But rather than make it a nonfiction and say, well, this coach from this school did this and offered this kid this kind of money. I didn't want to get involved with lawyers. I didn't want someone to blow my car up. No, so I changed the names to protect the innocent, but also to protect some of the guilty. So it became it was a fiction book, and it was called Hot Seat. And it took you through a year of as the main character is the head coach at Ohio State. And he's told you have 1 year to win or else. So then after that book was done, people said, you ought to write the sequel to it now that we're having NIL and all these things that are going on. And I've been consulting in NIL nationally now for 3.5, 4 years. So I've been exposed to a lot of things that are happening all over the country, good and bad. And so I decided, well, let's do a follow-up and let's get into the things that are really going on. So this is nonfiction fiction. It's a novel, but it's all based on things that are really going on. I think it's really eye-opening for fans to see some of these stories, to see some of the challenges that these guys have. And I think it's eye-opening for anybody that wants to play football at this level, or any parents that have kids that want to play football at this level, as that's really kind of the impetus behind doing this book, is to really kind of pull back the curtain on it.
Now, the transfer portal, if it was around when you played, could you see a lot of your teammates staying for Joe Paterno? I mean, was there a loyalty to him that not even the transfer portal can ruin?
I think it always comes down to how you recruit people. And I think somebody's going to get the right formula at this level and say they're going to go recruit. The base of their team is going to be guys they recruit and develop. Like you got to look at like Major League Baseball, where I'm going to get guys in as freshmen, like a farm system, develop them over 3 and 4 years. And I'm going to have a core of my team that is seniors. And then I'm going to go to the portal and get, pieces here and there. And I think if you look at Oregon, that's kind of what they've done. And Dan Lanning, I was at the Ohio State Oregon game, got to spend a few minutes with him, and get a feel for what they're doing out there while I was out there for the weekend. And, they seem to be doing that. And, so they're a good team to kind of watch as kind of everybody thinks Phil Knight went out and bought him a team. That's absolutely not true. Phil Knight's a family friend that sat with him during the game. So it's not a situation they just went out and wrote a check and bought a team. They got the pieces they need, and they've got people behind some of the older guys they've gotten in the portal to develop. So I think that's what's going to have to happen. And if you recruit people with that mindset and you get to a point where you have an older team, talent with experience is almost always going to beat talent that's inexperienced.
Jay, I got to say, as someone who has Penn State, we are Penn State blood in you. You must be excited about this opportunity to host a home game. A very special moment for 6 teams that get to do this, isn't it?
Yo, no question. And it's snowing outside today. SMU, I do a TV show called Nittany Game Week, and SMU's last 6 games, the coldest it's been was 44 degrees. The average kickoff temperature was 65, I think it was. It'll be in the 20s at kickoff tomorrow, so it'll be a little bit of a shock. But
who's loving this right now is my friend Joe Bastardi, who knows you, I believe.
Oh, absolutely.
And
we should have called him for the forecast.
I work with him in radio, so I'm going to tell him that we talked today and share this with him. Jay, I got to say, your relationship with Penn State, you're on the board. Maybe people don't realize that, but you are on the board. Tell us about that experience.
Well, being the board of trustees, it's one of those things that everybody thinks it sounds like a great idea till you get on the board. You win your board election, you get on, you're like, wow, there's this. It is a very, very serious job. You don't get paid for it, obviously, so it's not really a job. We do get a parking pass. That's our big perk. We get a parking pass anywhere on campus, which, by the way, living here in town, that is of great value. But, you're dealing with things in your medical system. We've got a medical school enterprise as well as a health enterprise. Then you're dealing with we do $1.2 billion in research a year at this university, and that's a big number. The overall budget is just under $10 billion at Penn State. We've got 80-something thousand students, not just here at University Park, but across the system as well as on our world campus. And then when you talk about all those things, and then people talk about football. Well, football generates about $100 million in revenue out of $10 billion. So it's really not that big a deal in terms of a fiscal standpoint. So, getting on the board of trustees, it's a very serious endeavor.
Absolutely. And do you have any, not oversight, but do you ever get involved in the football program still? Or is the Paterno name still attached to the football program?
I stay away for a couple of reasons. Number one, this job's hard enough without a guy that used to coach sticking his nose. My dad's sticking his 2 cents in. As my dad used to tell boosters, we want your money, but not your 2 cents. Which is how, so I feel that way. So, I mean, we've done some things. We started a collective a couple years ago, which was the first collective that we had here at Penn State. And then as a trustee, I had to back away. So that's one area we've been involved in a little bit. And at one point, that collective had all 85 scholarship players under contract to do things, as well as athletes in all 31 sports. But, I've tried to stay away and let them do their job. They don't need, I had my time. I had a great run. I had a lot of fun. And I enjoy watching the games. I root. And even upstairs, people go, what do you think? I'm like, I'm not telling you what I think they should do because I know, nope. So I keep.
But you're hoping they do it anyway. You're like rooting for that to happen.
Oh,
if you can't say
I want them to win. But I do a TV show every week. We're on 12, 13 stations across the Northeast. So there's a part of me that stays away also because I have that kind of 2-hat role.
Let me ask you this: Drew Aller and Franklin. I mean, this is a good coach QB combination. Isn't that a reason why they got here?
Yeah, no question. And I think Tyler Warren at tight end, no question.
Yeah.
I mean, without him, they probably lose the USC.
I heard he was a Heisman. He should have been in the running for Heisman. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I think he finished 7th, which is that's the highest finish for a tight end in a long time. I think the highest finish we ever had, Ted Kwolek back in 68, finished 4th, and Ted Kwolek was on the Sports Illustrated as a tight end, Sports Illustrated all-century team from 1900 to 1999. So obviously he's probably the greatest to ever play the position here. But Tyler Warren had an unbelievable year. Without him, we lose a couple of games. And Allard has made some great throws in some key drives in those games. And then at Wisconsin, Bo Prabula, who just transferred, sad to see him go. But he came in the second half. We were trailing, and he really sparked that. So without him, we'd probably lose. But they've done a really good job, and I'm glad Allar's coming back because I think he'll benefit from another year. I don't think he's a slam dunk first rounder right now, but I think he can play himself into being a really high draft pick.
Now, the game against Oregon, it was a little up and down, and the interception happened. But the fact that Oregon's exploded into the Big Ten, did you see that coming? That seemed like a surprise to the Big Ten, didn't it?
Well, because of having a relationship with Phil Knight over the years, I've always kind of watched them and kept an eye on what they're doing, and they're pretty innovative in how they've approached some things. Dan Lanning, I think, was a great hire for them. I watched them extensively last year, and I saw a guy that was building a physical football team up front. Mm-hmm. I think he was anticipating this and had speed on the outside. And when I came back from the Ohio State-Oregon game, I said, this team can win the whole thing because they're physical up front, but they had elite speed on the outside. I mean, you miss a tackle on these guys, they're gone. And so it didn't surprise me. And I think he was building this team. And when they added Dylan Gabriel in the offseason, I said, I think that's the team to be. I said, I hate to say it's the Penn State, but I think Oregon's the team to be because I watched Gabriel at the Texas-Oklahoma game a year ago when Texas was number 3, take them down the field and make clutch throw after clutch throw and beat Texas in the Red River rivalry. So I thought they'd have a good shot to win this thing this year.
Well, we'll have to see what happens. Now, another coach that sort of blasts on the scene is Deion Sanders. When Coach Prime went to Colorado, do you feel like that changed the coaching landscape a little bit, or what was that reaction from you?
It was one of those things. He had done a good job at Jackson State. So, I think it's easy to forget that he was there and did a really good job there. So it wasn't his first gig, which I think is important. And I think he went in there, had massive turnover. I think when you look at what he did from year 1 to year 2, I think he managed it a little better. I think they look like a much better prepared team this year in some key games than they did a year ago. So I think that, and some of that is just it. Everybody thinks you can, flip a switch and you go. I mean, Indiana this year is a perfect example of a team that came in and just flipped a switch and everything kind of worked out for him. But I think it takes a while, and I think he's able to attract some really good talent. He's got some veteran coaches around him who've been in the NFL on that level. So I think it's going to be interesting to see, and I think Belichick's another one. I mean,
yeah,
this is another one where you start to look at and say, the transfer portal gives you free agency every year. The NIL money becomes a way to get free agents with no salary cap. So, it's going to be, I think the
Now,
Beyond experiment's going to be fun to watch as it goes. And the Belichick one's going to be fascinating to watch as well.
so you work with the NIL aspect. Do you think though it's good for the sport?
Well, I think here's the thing. I think NIL has become really two different things: what it's supposed to be and what it is. And there's two different types of NIL. And like I said, I've consulted it for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
The original idea would be a guy like Travis Hunter playing at Colorado, and Gatorade or Nike or whatever, Caitlin Clark at Iowa, for example, says, you know what, we think this is an athlete we want to endorsing our product. We think there's a return on investment if this person does this, and we'll get something out of it. And so they do it as a business. The other track of what's happened is with the collectives, you have guys that are getting paid, just they're getting contracts to do some promotional stuff here and there, but it's not really based on what their true NIL is worth. It's more of a pay to play. So your second team left tackle could make 50 grand to tweet every 6 or 7 times about a charity or something like that. So there's two different tracks on this thing. I think that when we get revenue sharing next year, I think that'll settle down then, and then it'll go back to more of the true NIL.
I think of what Ohio State was willing to do, which is basically throw the kitchen sink to keep Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, that's almost like a Soto getting a big contract. I'm sorry to make that a comparison, but that's what it feels like. And at what point do they still have that? Is it a kids game still, or a college kids game, or is that out the window now?
I think what we have now is you have it until they get a process in place where there is revenue sharing and collective bargaining. And look, I'm an old school guy. This is not what I want, but I'm also a realist in that this is what this sport needs right now to settle down the jumping every year, the NIL. Because, Soto signed a contract. He can't just next year go,
right.
I didn't really enjoy my time with the Mets. I'm out. I'm going to go over to back the Yankees. So I think those things have to happen. But until that happens, you have players that are independent contractors that can go wherever they want year to year. I think it puts tremendous pressure on kids. And one of the things that I write about in the book, and I think it's important people understand, it's not all puppies and rainbows. You have kids that are dealing with a lot of mental health issues and pressure because, well, if I don't jump in the portal right away, the school that I may want to go to may grab somebody else. The NIL deal that I can get might go to somebody else. Should I stay? Am I happy here? What can I get here? And then I got to be able to perform at a high level, and I've got to handle all these things. Oh, and by the way, I got to go to school. There's that little element that everybody forgets about. And so those mental health pressures have been very, very real. And also because, as you mentioned, it's not a kid's game anymore. When you look at a kid playing at Notre Dame 10 years ago, it's a 19-year-old. You're a fan of Notre Dame. You go, well, there's a guy out there giving his best for the Irish. Now they professionalize themselves. And because of gambling and prop bets, they're now professional commodities in a lot of people's eyes. So when they don't do well, they come at them on social media, and schools have not prepared kids at all for that mental health aspect. And that comes through in the book. And I think that's one of the lessons in the book.
Jay, I got to ask you this. We're in bowl season. And when you say Notre Dame, Sam Hartman sat out his bowl game last year, which is a trend. As a coach, as a fan of college football, and I'm sure, as the son of Joe Paterno, you both probably would think, why are they sitting for this game? It sounds pretty stupid to me. But now they think of themselves as a commodity, I think, right? As you say. Yeah.
And I think, I think next year you're going to see players that say, I'm not going to play in the playoff unless we get paid. I mean, look, you can take if Oregon and Ohio State, if Ohio State wins this week and they go to the Rose Bowl, play Oregon, next week. Mm-hmm. If 10 minutes before kickoff, the Oregon players and Ohio State players say, unless you guys commit to giving us X amount of dollars for playing this game, we're not playing. I don't know how good Dan Lanning is at cornhole, and I don't know how good Ryan Day is at cornhole. They may be great. They may be top 10 in the world for all I know. But no one's going to stick around the Rose Bowl to watch them play cornhole. It's the players. And the players, I think, really where it turned was during COVID.
Mm.
The things that our players had to do on a campus that was empty. They were quarantined. They had to do all these things to make the game. And what they realized is, why are we doing this? Oh, so the university can get their TV check.
Well, I was
Well,
going to
why don't
ask
we
you.
get a cut of it?
I was going to ask you that. Do you think the NCAA did this to themselves, where the players, after their jerseys get sold and all that, and their likenesses on on the NCAA sports, they just said, "We're done. We're fed up just being used like that," if you will?
No question. And it was the thing that's happened with the NCAA is they've lost lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, and they're reacting to events that have overtaken them rather than being proactive. 4 years ago, when California passed the law, the old school coaches and ADs would have said, "Okay, let's just get to a new reality. We got to understand this is going to happen to us." 3 years ago, when we were going through some contract negotiations, I said to other members of the board of trustees, I said, "Revenue sharing is coming. It's going to be roughly 20 million a year." And now 3 years later, it's here and it's 22 million. And everybody, oh, well, the Congress is going to, no, we need to take things. So we did bring this upon ourselves in a way. And when you look at the Big Ten media contract is $1.1 billion a year. Players look at that and say, well, wait a minute. The head coaches are making, you have a head coach making $23,000, $24,000 a day. And the players are saying, I get like some walking around money. So, yeah, it's a system that they're learning from the adults. The adults, because of agents, because of contracts, because of what all these people are making. This. So, wait a minute. I did a guest lecture at a class, and there were members at the school I was at. There were members of the current team in that class. It was sports, and I was talking about the salary. And the one guy said, "Hey, how come the head coach makes all that money? Because, compared to us, he doesn't do anything." And I said, "Well, that's a system issue, dude. You got to bring that up with them."
Well, I got to ask you a couple more things, because Penn State's had a revitalization in the last few years. What's behind that revitalization, if you will?
Well, I think it's a matter of this. This is a place where you have things that you've always had things in place to be successful here. And I think, the reality is the Big Ten right now, it's top heavy. So it's Ohio State, it's Michigan, it's Penn State. Now that Oregon's in, they're kind of in that group. Whereas the first 10 years we were in the Big Ten, from 93 through 2000, 2003, eight of the 11 schools won the Big Ten in that stretch. If you look at up till this year, the last 10 years or so, it's been Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State won once. I think Michigan State won once. So it's become a much more concentrated, top-heavy league. And Penn State is right. They haven't been able to catch Ohio State like we'd like to.
Sure.
Michigan's kind of had our number a little bit. But we're right there in that next tier of schools trying to make that jump in. And I think getting the Big Ten championship game this year was a big step forward.
I also think
we do owe Michigan some thanks on that one, because Ohio State did beat us, but we'll take it.
I also think CBS, getting that contract is huge exposure for Penn State, right? I mean, there is that too.
Yeah, no. And when you look at it, the Big Ten now has a noon game on Fox that's national, a noon game on CBS that's national, or excuse me, a 3:30 game, and you have a 7:30 game on NBC that's national. So you have a showcase for recruits around the country to see. Plus now, with NIL money, recruiting can be much more national, because back then, if we went and recruited a kid from Texas or California, whatever, and the kid didn't have a lot of money, getting back and forth was an issue. Now that's not an issue, because they can make money. They can make enough money for their parents to come to every game if they want. So
how many kids were recruited by your father that were local? Like, how many local kids did you guys get?
Oh, I couldn't tell you the number off the top of my head. But his whole thing was, let's start from where we are, and let's draw a circle 200 to 300 miles around us. And with that circle, you were in D.C., you were in Maryland, you were in Jersey, you were in all of Pennsylvania, Philly, and Pittsburgh, you were in Eastern Ohio. And those places, he said, we can find enough players as a base there. And we have an advantage in that they can get to us easily. We can get to them easily. He said, then we would go beyond that. Even it was to go recruit Florida. And he'd say, well, by the time you get to Florida, you passed over the entire state of Virginia. And the number of players that have come out of Virginia is really high. North Carolina, we had great players from South Carolina over the years. And then we cherry pick kids from Florida. I signed when I was coaching there. I signed a couple kids out of Seattle. You pick those guys that have a connection or something. We had a kid from California whose family was all from Pittsburgh originally, and so they had relatives here. So you'd find those places, but those kids had to pay their own way back and forth. Now that's changed with NIL.
All right. I want to talk about this moment where your dad was pretty much tackled on the sideline and yet was still coaching from the booth. From your perspective, what was that moment like where he not only came back from that injury, but was still coaching? Were you amazed? Were you like, well, that's just my dad? Like, what was your thought on that?
Well, you told me that at Wisconsin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Broke his leg, needed an ACL, and immediately got up and stood for about 2 minutes or a minute and a half. So I'm up in the booth. I go, well, he's okay. And so, I'm still we're coaching the game, whatever. And next thing I know, he's in a cart because he can't stand anymore. So, I mean, that sucker was just not made of the same stuff the rest of us were made of. I mean, he just, and he said, when I get the surgery, I'll come back earlier than they think, and he had a hip replacement. He was up running around within a couple of days. He was not human in that regard in terms of toughness. We played out at Northwestern in 2005, and we had come off a couple of tough years. And right before the game, he is in the bathroom, sick as a dog, throwing up, whatever. And our team doctor's like, Coach, you got to stay in here. You can't go out. He goes, heck, I'm not. This game's too big. Comes out in front of the team, gives him this rousing kind of like, let's go out and get this done. But stands on the sideline. There is no way you would tell that he was as sick as he was. Halftime, he comes back and he hid it from the team. He didn't want them to know. And that's just the way he was.
Another tough character we just lost here in New York, Luke Hornacek. I have to say, both the 80s featured Joe Pa and Luke Hornacek. Were they friends at all? Did they know each other at all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he knew him. Even PJ Carlissimo, he knew PJ's dad because if you go way back, they used to do all these sports camps up in the Catskills. So my dad would go up there at times, and Carnacek, I think, was at those things. Carlissimo was at those things. You go to even to guys like Bill Parcells was at those Bobby Knight.
Sure.
And these guys would all get together at these camps. And they would kibbutz, and talk about, hey, what do you think? How do you handle this? And they create these lasting friendships out of there. So, yeah. And my dad grew up going to games to Madison Square Garden, he said the old Garden, not the new, And, he saw Jerry West play there when Jerry West was West Virginia. They came in there and played. But, my dad played basketball at Brown for 2 years. So he had he loved basketball and had a real good base in that. In fact, since you are a New Yorker, you know the name Weave Eubank.
Yeah, of course.
Weave Eubank was the running back coach at Brown University when my dad was there, and he was the basketball coach at Brown. He was my dad's basketball coach. So, so certainly a lot of basketball ties there.
I don't know if you know this name, Madison Eisen, but I told her I'm not interviewing you because she's a big Penn State. She goes there. She's all over the athletics. So I just want to give her a shout out there as we're talking. And she was excited that I'm talking to you about all of this. Jay, obviously we've talked about your dad, but I want to talk about you as well. Did you have your own college experience that wasn't under the shadow of your dad? I mean, how did you diversify yourself from Joe Pa, if that makes sense?
It wasn't easy. It was probably, and I probably wasn't mature enough to handle it as well as I could have. And I say that without any hesitation because at time when I wrote the book about my dad back in 2014, I talked about when I was in college and that I was immature and didn't do things necessarily always the way I should. And so I was but I mean, I never introduced myself as Jay Paterno. I mean, I actually went out on 2 dates with a girl, and by the third date, someone said to her, "You know who that guy is?" And she's like, "No, it's Jay." She said, "No, it's Jay Paterno," and it just never came up. It's not quite like the Seinfeld episode where I couldn't remember someone's name. The infamous Mulva episode of Seinfeld.
Oh yes, yeah.
But I mean, it was one of those things, and then and when I grew up in State College, everybody knew me, so I wasn't a novelty act to some people. Whereas, I think my first year in college, my mom's like, "Okay, why don't you come over to the house for for your birthday, because my birthday was in the fall. So I'd only been in college 2 months or 3 months at that time. And I invited a girl that I was semi-interested in to come to dinner. It's just dinner at my house,
Right.
And she then told me that like her whole sorority was in her room picking out outfits because, you're going to Joe Paterno's house for dinner. And that was like, and I was like, really? Like that's a thing? And she's like, not for me, but for them it was, I mean, so, but it's a reality, and there was benefits to it. There were drawbacks to it. And like everything else in life, you get dealt a hand, you get good cards, you get bad cards, and just deal with the positives and negatives.
And now you're a successful writer, and you're still out there in the college football world. One last thing I admire about Penn State is the whiteout game. I mean, who came up with that idea? Because it's a brilliant idea.
Well, if you go back to 2004, we played Purdue, and a guy named Guido D'Elia was really kind of running a lot. He was a guy that had done some things for us, like football show, and said, "Hey, I think I can probably help you guys out with some, evaluating, recruiting, that kind of stuff." So after a number of conversations, he just kind of morphed into this role where he was doing some things like that. So we did a student section whiteout against Purdue when they were really, really good. And we took them to the ropes, and we weren't a great team that year. Well, the next year we did it for Ohio State, and we won. And it took off because we had come back and had a great year, and we beat Ohio State, and everybody in the country saw that moment. So then we were sitting around talking, and Guido D'Elia said to me, I think we got to do something. We hated hearing about Michigan was the big house. So I said, we're talking. So what's bigger than the big house? And he said, well, the White House. So Guido said, let's do a whole stadium whiteout. At that point, we couldn't get it. He didn't want to do it in 2006. He wanted to do it. We continued to do student section whiteouts in 2006. But what he decided was we were playing Notre Dame in week 2 or 3 in 2007. And he said, that's when we do the all stadium whiteout. So they sent in the ticket, when they sent out the season tickets, everyone had a card that said, you were invited to the White House. Everyone wear white for Notre Dame. Now, the good thing is we went out and we won the game. It was an incredible experience. It became the talk of college football. And it just got bigger and bigger and bigger every year to where now it's a bucket list thing for college football fans. And it's taken on a life of its own. But it's become kind of a signature moment. We don't have that necessarily Ohio State Michigan game on our schedule every year, that rivalry game, but we do have the whiteout, and people that's appointment television.
All right. Well, I got to make it now in one of the next few years. I'll keep you posted on that. Jay, got to ask you the most inspirational football player, whether Penn State or that you coached or that you saw play. I mean, from your eyes.
I'm a guy that grew up with heroes that I idolized, and Roger Staubach, who played at Navy, was a guy that I idolized. Franco Harris clearly was, and we lost him way too soon. Played at Penn State, was a great family friend, a very, very loyal human being in Penn Stater. But it's my wife grew up in Pittsburgh, and that was her childhood idol. Like when she was 8, she was getting Franco Harris jersey and everything. And one of the things she said about him, which really struck home after he died, she said, how fortunate, and I'm quoting her, how fortunate I was to have a childhood idol and then get to know that childhood idol as an adult and understand that as great a football player and a person as I thought he might be, he was even better. And those are the kind of people I've been fortunate to be around in my life. I mentioned Phil Knight before. I mean, he didn't play football, but there's a guy, that you look at and say does things that you idolize. But I mean, guys like that played the game. We recruited Walter Payton's son and had a chance to spend a lot of time when we were recruiting Jarrett Payton. Got a chance to spend some time with Walter Payton. And, on we did a home visit, and Jarrett Payton and I are sitting on the couch in his house. And there's Joe Paterno and Walter Payton just talking football. And we're just sitting there going, I don't mean, I want Jared to come to Penn State. We didn't get him. But this alone has been worth the last several months of recruiting. I mean, so, and the game has produced some really outstanding human beings. It really has. And those are 3 people just off the top of my head, but there's so many more.
Would you say your dad and you had a role in shaping the lives of those kids that you both coached over those years, or what?
Oh, there's no question. If you're not trying to shape people's lives in college, as a coach, then you don't belong here, because that's really what the job's about. You're an educator first. Yeah, you want to win games. The pressure's on to do that, but at the end of the day, you do have a responsibility to make these people better people than when they left and when they came to your place. So, yeah, I mean, it's and the thing is, you don't necessarily know it in real time. You'll hear back from a coach or a guy that you coached. I coached Matt Rule when he was at Penn State, for example. And several years after he was out of there, he wrote me a really nice letter and said, you told me this one time. I'm like, man, I barely remember saying that. Like, so those kind of things, that feedback, teach you that even some of these, there's teachable moments where you sit down and you make a
it sticks with you, and then it sticks with the athlete.
Yeah, but there's also drive-by teachable moments that you say something that you react to based on your core values that are innate to you, but to someone else, like, wow, I've never thought of it that way. And they'll throw it back to you years later. And like, wow, I barely remember saying it. But those are the important things. And that's why the example matters. And I think that's one of the things that's tough in college coaching now, is with agents involved and the money that's involved and all that kind of things, players are learning from what coaches and administrators are doing. And I think that's kind of why we're at where we're at.
Well, there you go. Jay, one last thing. You mentioned the whiteout game was Notre Dame versus Penn State, the very first one. Could we see that in the football final here, the college football playoff final, or what? Is that a possibility, you think?
Oh, I think it's possible. I mean, once you get to into a playoff, anything can happen. You got to stay healthy. You got to be lucky. Georgia loses their quarterback. That's going to be an issue for them down the stretch. Mm-hmm. But at least they have a bye, so they have a chance to spend some time getting this guy ready to go. But I mean, so much of it is the luck of injuries. The ball bounces a certain way. But certainly, Notre Dame has played well enough on defense all year. They run the ball. They do some of the things you need to do to win. They get turnover. They create an enormous amount of turnovers in that secondary. As I mentioned, Al Golden, I played with him in college. He's done a great job with their defense. I think Penn State has enough. A guy like Tyler Warren can be a guy that really creates a lot of matchup problems for teams when you get ready to play us. I think defensively, Penn State's really good. So yeah, it's possible to see these teams meeting up in the playoff, and it'd be a lot of fun.
All right. Well, your book, Blitz: The All-Out Pressure of College Football's New Era. As long as there's a Paterno in this era, I'm feeling confident that we can keep going.
Yeah, I think and I've tried to, from a consulting standpoint, and as on the board of trustees at Penn State, try and get people to kind of remember, make sure that it's time for the universities and the players to sit down together and start to figure out what is equitable for everybody here.
Jay Paterno, would you mind coming back as we go?
No problem. This? No problem.
Right. Thanks for joining. I want to dedicate this episode to Uncle Larry, who was in my old apartment. He brought me to a couple Penn State games with my dad, so it's dedicated to him and my dad today.
All right, here's hats off to Uncle Larry.
All right, Jay. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Take care.
Take care. Oh, Jay, that was awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem.